Yes guys, welcome back to the YouTube channel, and in today's episode I want to show you exactly how, again, apologies, I'm left-handed, but I want to show you exactly how to start a Airbnb business in 2025. And again, just to fact check exactly why I'm the best guy you should be listening to, not only have I been able to massively scale and grow to 30 properties in less than 18 months, I've done that extremely with limited cash, no external funding, no family handouts, no loans or anything like that, just by simply bankrolling and constantly reinvesting my funds into my business. Right? So one of the first steps you need to understand is your location, right? Before anything, before you get into the compliance, before you get into the due diligence or anything like that, you want to get a good understanding of your location. Now, when it comes to location, I have something called the 4 pillars, right? Now, the 4 pillars are the fundamentals of what makes an amazing location. Number 1, you want to make sure that there are landmark amenities, right? So if we're in London, so like the Big Ben, Madame Tussauds, the clock towers, the museums, all of that kind of stuff, right? That's going to bring in a lot of your leisure guests standardly, right? Leisure guests can make anywhere from 40 to 60% of your average guest demographic. Then after that, we now want to look into our contractor side. So we want to see if there's any sort of developments. We want to see if there's any sort of hospitals, right, in the areas. The reason why is because this is going to attract a lot of our working demographic of guests, right? Because if the developments, if there's cranes, if there's workmen around, if there's hospitals around, that's going to bring corporates and a lot of contractors who are also going to stay with us, who also bring that other 40 to 60%. The next thing, and obviously an obvious one, is transportation, right? We want to make sure that at least there's a mainline transportation, that being major bus links, trams, or tube stations or train stations within a mile away from the property, right? Because the easier mode of transport, the more likely people will obviously book your property, right? Now, the last one, and probably the most important one, you want to be at least within a mile of a hotel. Now, probably the most important pillar. And again, not a lot of people would actually think, why the hell would I want a hotel, right? Now, a lot of people think, oh, hotels are going to take our business, or hotels are a good indicator of how much you can charge. Not exactly. Let me ask you guys a question. How much do you think it costs Travelodge to set up a hotel? 5 million, 10 million, 100 million? I don't know, right? But a heck ton of money. And you'd like to think if Travelodge are going to spend tens of millions of pounds or a heck ton amount of money, they would have done their due diligence, right? They would have checked to see that it stacks, it makes money, it's profitable, and it's an all-around good investment. So why are we actually trying to reinvent the wheel and trying to find out something else we can do when we can copy exactly what they've done in the sense of their market analysis? Travelodge aren't going to spend tens of millions of pounds in an area that isn't going to be profitable, right? So out of all of these pillars, I often always say, if you have, not in any particular order, right, by the way, but if you have 1, 2, 3 out of 4 pillars, you've got a good location. If you've got 4 out of 4 pillars, you have an amazing location. And I was able to understand this philosophy whilst looking at my portfolio. And I thought, what are the areas and what are the locations that have performed predominantly well, right? And after looking at them, I found all of my locations that perform well have got good landmark amenities, have got developments or hospitals in the area, have got good transport links, or have a Travelodge, a Premier Inn, or a Holiday Inn in the immediate vicinity. And this is what leads to an amazing location. Once you've got your locations, the finance side, right? This is what I call, or something called due diligence, or DD, right? This is actually making sure that everything stacks and it makes money. I've always said securing the properties is the easiest thing, right? Or simple, shall I say, when it comes to property. It's a no-brainer. Hey, Mr. Landlord, we're gonna give you a guaranteed rent for your property, right? And we're gonna take care of it, manage all the maintenances, yada, 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 mutual exchange. But the hardest thing is making sure that this makes money, that this is actually profitable. And this is exactly how I show a lot of my mentees who actually join my mentorship program how we go about doing due diligence. When it comes to doing due diligence, I do not like using software at all, personally. If anything, I like to use software to reaffirm all of my personal manual due diligence that I've done. Because what happens with a lot of the softwares like AirDNA that a lot of you might have heard of who are looking to start Airbnb is that only take into consideration a lot of analysis on Airbnb and not necessarily on booking.com, which means that a part of your data might be flawed. It also doesn't take into consideration when properties are empty, they're blocked out for long bookings, or perhaps properties aren't available or there's multiple listings, which can potentially inflate the price and obviously inflate the occupancy as well, leading you to think you can make a lot more than you actually can, right? So what's a better way to do your due diligence than manually, which is what I love to do. And I will then use the software to manually reaffirm anything I've done. Now, once I've got my location right, and when I'm looking at locations, I like to be uber specific. I like to be postal specific in terms of where my location is, right? So saying if I was to be picking, say, Southeast London, for instance, right? So I was looking at, I don't know, like SE15, SE1, it's like London Bridge, that's like Camberwell, for those of you who are in like South London, or like, I don't know, SE16, which is like sort of the Peckham area, right? So I've got my locations of interest. What I would first immediately do is now go on Airbnb and do something what I call a global data research, right? This is a research tool or method, shall I say. So this is a research method that I've kind of invented that basically looks at the whole of the Airbnb platform to see all the existing Airbnbs that are currently there. And you can now do a manual research. So now firstly, I'm gonna put in the full postcode of the particular property or the location I have in interest, right? But I wanna be specific. I standardly go for 2-bedroom plus properties, right? The reason why I go for 2-bedroom plus properties is because studios and 1-beds often don't cost that much more in comparison, especially 1-beds to a 2-bed. So for instance, if a 1-bed costs £1,000, a 2-bed will likely cost anywhere from £1,200 to £1,300. But I can charge 50% more on a 2-bedroom property. And when it comes to studios, my direct competition is hotels. And when travelers want to drop their rates to £30–40 a night, I just can't quite compete. So I often like to go for 2 bedrooms plus, right? So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on Airbnb. I also do this on booking.com, but I like Airbnb just because the UI, the interface is a lot more easier to navigate, right? So I'm going to go on Airbnb and I'm going to input the full postcode of the property. And I'm going to use the filters on Airbnb, right, to make sure I'm selecting entire home, because on Airbnb, you can actually book by the room as well and shared facilities. And obviously on a room shared facility, the nightly rate and the occupancy will obviously be different, right? So I'm gonna filter by entire home. I'm gonna filter by, 2 bedrooms, right? Which is obviously what I'm looking at currently right now. Maybe I've got a tight budget of maybe £5,000. So I'm looking for a 2-bedroom plus property because I don't have the means for a 3-bed or a 4-bed or etc. Right? So I'll go for a 2-bedroom property in either of these locations, right? And then what I'm gonna do, you're gonna see a bit of a gray/yellow icon depending whether you're using a mobile phone or you are using any other device. And then from there, what you're going to do is you're going to zoom in until there's less than 1,000 properties, right? You're going to zoom in until there's less than 1,000 properties. And then now what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to open up multiple tabs, right? I'm going to open like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tabs. The reason why I like to open many tabs or have multiple comparisons is because I just want to look at just one property and then it believes, oh yeah, they're maybe charging £200 a night and their calendar appears to be fully booked. Amazing, wonderful. No, the more properties that you can analyze, the more properties that you can do due diligence on is going to be so much better for your market research, because the first property might not be that booked and the second property might not equally be that booked, but then the third and the fourth can even it out to provide you with an average, right? And also you need to make sure that you're comparing properties with the potential property you might also have as well. If you're looking at a 2-bedroom flat in Southeast London and you're comparing to 2-bedroom houses or to 2-bedroom penthouses, these are not direct comparisons. So you don't want to be using that as part of your data research. So I would open 10 similar 2-bedroom properties. If not, the more the merrier, because the better comparison / results you can get, the better, right? Now, when I'm doing my comparisons, I'm looking at 4 main things. One of the first things I'm looking at is the host and the reviews, right? The reason why I look at the host and reviews is because this gives me an understanding of the host's experience. Some hosts are unfortunately standardly beginners. And as a beginner in anything, what might you do? You might undercharge, you might overcharge. Your listing might not be to the greatest of qualities, right? So that also is something I take into consideration whilst looking at the majority of my properties, right? Because that will give me an indicator of potentially how people are charging and also their occupancy. I also look at the reviews because this gives me an indication of the performance of the property, right? Because if they got a 3 out of 5 on Airbnb, it's likely that they're going to be charging super cheap, or they might not be that booked, because why would someone want to book somewhere that isn't great? So again, this is something that you also need to be taking part in your due diligence. Now, the second set of things I look at is obviously the pictures, right? Now, the pictures, which is pretty much a given, are again, going back to what I said earlier about having direct comparisons. If I have a 2-bedroom apartment and I'm looking at a 2-bedroom penthouse or a 2-bedroom cottage or a 2-bedroom full terraced house, this isn't a direct comparison. Therefore, it's going to skew my data, because a 2-bedroom house standardly would cost more to rent and will also be charged more on the nightly rate. However, my 2-bedroom apartment won't be the same case. So it'll often be a lot cheaper, and because of the square footage, I can't charge that much, right? Now, the third thing I'm looking at is the occupancy, right? So now, with the occupancy, for those of you who don't know, the occupancy is a percentage at which on a 30-day calendar period, you are booked, right? So just kind of like taking you guys here for a second, just because I'm running out of space, right? On occupancy. So standardly, obviously 100% occupancy would be equal to 30 days in a calendar month, right? Now, 50% occupancy, which is ideally where we want to be breaking even, right, would equal to 15 days. Now, standardly in most city center locations, especially in London, the average occupancy is 70%, which equals 21 days. Now, this is massively important when it comes to doing our calculations. Okay, guys? Now, fourthly, or just for the sake of easy maths, 60% occupancy, which is also some other people's occupancy rates, depending on your location, again, 65% is about 18 days, right? And this is massively important. So now how I would actually find out the occupancy is I want to be looking in the calendar from today's date, 6 weeks from now, right? That is how I often like to gauge the occupancy of a property, right? I'm trying to gauge in the next 6 weeks from now, what does the calendar look like? Now, you need to understand that this is a fairly subjective search, because the lead time, which means the time from which a guest would actually book the property to when they're staying, might be 2 days. It might be 5 days. And they may average getting 70% occupancy or even 100% occupancy, right? One quick tip to note that on Airbnb specifically, any dates prior in the current month, so say we're in the 15th of October right now, the 1st to the 15th of October, or sorry, the 14th of October will appear to be blocked out. So you can't see the previous performance, you can only see the future performance of the property. Now, going back to that, I'm looking at the 6 weeks average to find out how booked are they, right? And another thing to note out, honestly speaking, if I just see back-to-back crossed out dates, I often don't take that as a legitimate booking, because again, I don't know, they could be given the property back, the property could be up for sale, they could have a direct booking, there could be so many things. So I would only take a legitimate bookings for when I see crossed out dates mixed with available dates. And that gives me a true understanding that they're actually booked up. So now once I've figured out the occupancy and I've said, and I can confidently say average occupancy is going to be anywhere from about 60 to 70%. Now the fourth thing I look at, and obviously the most important, is pricing, right? Now this is very, very important, because what a lot of people will typically tend to do is overinflate the prices to try and make it work. Property is a very simple, boring game. If the numbers work, the numbers work. The numbers very rarely do not lie. Right? Cool. So now this is how I go about doing my numbers. I'm gonna sort of move across to here and I'm gonna wipe all of this out once we've sort of finished off the due diligence. So now going back to pricing, right? Or sometimes known as ADR, right? Average daily rates or nightly rate, right? So this is how we go about looking at our pricing. Now, typically when a lot of people are looking at the pricings, they often will just visit and take the first ever price that they see on the Airbnb site. Now, I don't like to do that. When I'm doing my pricing, I like to take two key metrics in place. I like to think of the season and the day within the week. And I'll explain. I want to make sure I'm looking at my pricing in an off-peak season. What does an off-peak season mean? An off-peak season is effectively when the kids are in school, when there's not a holiday, not Christmas, not Valentine's, no major holiday. And the reason why is because during Christmas, during the summer period, or even sometimes when there are public holidays, these prices are going to be inflated. So I don't want to be looking at comparable nightly rates when the prices are going to be inflated. If I can make money during the off-peak season, then I'm 110% going to make a heck ton of money during the peak season. Now, the second thing I like to look at is the day. So I would only look at my pricing from a Monday to Thursday. Again, same thing similarly when it comes to the peak pricing or a off-peak pricing method is I don't want to be looking at my prices during a Friday, Saturday and Sunday where most people are traveling, where most people are away, and again, where also the nightly rates are going to be super inflated. So again, if I can make money during the off-peak season between a Monday to Thursday, I'm 110% going to be profitable during a Friday to Saturday in the peak times, right? So when I'm also doing my pricing, I like to look at a few different months because some people may have something called dynamic pricing. Guys, if you want to know what dynamic pricing is and how it can help your business and you want me to make a separate video on it, please comment in this video below. But some people may have dynamic pricing, which effectively means it's changing a lot of their pricings, right? So I would often like to look at a few months. So again, maybe if we're in October, I would maybe look in October, I would look in what's after October? November, and I'd look into December as well. So I would look into a few different months, just provide me a variety of different pricings throughout. So this is exactly how I'd look about doing my DD. So let me show you exactly how we calculate profitability, right? So the formula is as follows. Hopefully you guys can understand this mess and I've spelled formula correct. So the formula is this. The ADR times occupancy times Airbnb service fee minus your rent minus your bills equals your profits, right? This is the profitability calculator in terms of how you go about doing your due diligence and ultimately your numbers, right? So I'm gonna just move slightly over here. Hopefully you guys can still see this, right? So bringing this right here. Now, when it comes to doing your numbers, going back to location, assuming, right, we found a suitable 2-bedroom property in the SE15, SE1, London Bridge or Camberwell area. It's suitable for us. There's not going to be any restrictions on how we operate and whatnot, right? So we know our rent is £1,500. Okay, now, whilst we've been doing our due diligence and we've looked at our 10 properties and we've looked at the average occupancy, we found on average 2-bedroom properties in the SE1 postal area are charging £200 a night, for instance. Okay, so they're charging £200 per night and they have an average occupancy of 70%. So in line with the formula, right, they are charging £200 per night. And we have to multiply that by the average occupancy. And if we remember, the average occupancy at 70% or the occupancy at 70% equals 21 days. So we times that by 21 days. And that equals £4,200. Now, again, a lot of people online will get super excited and tell, yeah, that's how much money you're making, that's the profitability. No, that is not the case, right? You need to remove what's next, Airbnb service fees. Now, Airbnb unfortunately charge 15%, and if you're in the UK, they also charge VAT as well, right? So that's 18%. So what you need to do is times this number by 0.82, right? You want to times that number by 0.82, so that's 4,200 times that by 0.82. Now you're left with 3,444 pounds. Don't get too excited, guys. This isn't our profit. What's next? We have to minus our rent. Now, again, in this example, let's just say we found the average 2-bedroom on Rightmove that's in our perfect location, and that is, say, £1,500 a month, right? So we're now gonna minus £1,500 from this number, which is our rent, which leaves us with £1,944. It looks good, guys, but again, we're not quite there when it comes to profits that we've made for the month. We now need to minus our bills. So now this isn't quite the profit. We need to obviously find out our bills. Now, if you guys want me to make a separate video about how you go about calculating bills, please let me know in the comments below. So again, just an approximate, so don't shoot me. Let's just say, you know, council tax, Wi-Fi, water, internet, all those other bits and pieces, energy, obviously. Let's just say that equals up to, I don't know, £500, right? So what we're gonna do is remove our bills from this number here, right? So after we do that, we minus £500. We are left with a profit of £1,444, which doesn't sound too bad, right? £1,444 in profit from one Airbnb property, guys, right? So this is how we've done our due diligence. And yes, as you can see, it's probably taken up about 70% of the board, but this is one of the most important things, and this is massively underlooked. So then now, when I'm actually going to call landlords and I'm going to call estate agents, I know I have a nice buffer. I can potentially, because of the profit I'm making here, potentially go up to £2,000, right, in rent. And I know I'm still making about £1,000 in profits, right? Whereas what a lot of people will simply do is just look at the location, take an assumption that you're in London, Birmingham City, Liverpool, a city center location, and just think you're gonna be making a heck tons of money. The DD, the due diligence, is where so many people go wrong. And that's why so many people have Airbnbs and properties that aren't profitable and aren't making any money, right? So I'm gonna wipe all of this off and I'm gonna take you to the next step, which is all about compliance and setting up your business. Just rehashing, we understand our location, right? Which in this example was the SE15, SE1 area. We understand our rentals because we've gone on Rightmove or on Gumtree to find a similar 2-bedroom property, and we've done our due diligence and we know that we can charge £200 a night and we have an average occupancy of around 70%, right? So we've done all our due diligence, we know how much money we can make, right? So we pretty much have an understanding of when to now start going out to landlords, when to start going out to estate agents, how we go about doing that. And guys, if you want also a separate video about how I personally have acquired over 50 properties in my career and I've acquired every single property within my portfolio that I run, let me know and I can make a separate video on a step-by-step on how I pitch landlords and estate agents and how I actually get them to say yes and turn no's into maybes and maybes into yes, right? So now thirdly, what I want us to go through now is the compliance. So when it comes to compliance, it's very important that we don't try to overcomplicate compliance. It doesn't need to be a difficult thing. The first thing you need is an LTD. This is a limited liability company, right? Or a business, right? And I use a company setup that sets up company called First Formations, right? And again, I've got a referral link in my bio for you guys to use. This is First Formations. Now, First Formations make it super simple when it comes to setting up a business. All you simply need to put in is your company name, which could be Freeman Estates, if you want. I can't even spell my name. And if it's available, it will show you a green tick, right? then it will now produce you or now move you over to the next page. And they have about 4 different options from memory. Now, standardly, I often always go for the privacy package. Now, the reason why I like to go for the privacy package is because 1, it gives you a fancy central London virtual address, which you can send your post to and it appears on company's house. And it actually doesn't display your personal address because by UK government law, specifically, or even whether you're in Scotland or Wales or most other countries, you will need to display your director, you being the owner of the business, your personal address or providing address. And that likely will have to be your personal address. So I personally don't want to have my personal address just out there on the internet. So that's why I have a private address, right? So now once you select your packages, you will now need a bank. Now, I also have banks with, again, this is more so for people in the UK, but again, internationals, please let me know in comment, and I'm more than happy to provide referrals or what to look out for when it comes to using a good bank. Now, a lot of these smart banks in the UK, like Starling, Monzo, and Tide are great, but in the long run, you want to have a high street bank like your NatWest, your HSBC, or whatnot. I'm not affiliated with any of them necessarily, but I've got experience with most of them. And I'd often say, try to get a smarter bank when first starting up, like a Tide or a Monzo. The reason why is because their setup process is quite straightforward. If you want, I can also, again, provide you with my referral link in the comment below for the banks that I've used. I think you guys get, 20 quid, 50 quid, and I get a bit of cash as well, transparently speaking. So now, once you've selected your option and you've selected your bank, it's gonna now prompt you to now set up a domain. Now, when setting up a domain, this is very important that it doesn't necessarily have to be linked with your name, but also know when you're setting up your domain, and this is a big lesson for me, it's also going to be your email. So if my business company or my domain was Freeman Estates Ltd, and I want it to be Freeman, right, at Freeman Estates Ltd.co.uk. It's a super long email, and trust me, I'm still suffering with the fact that anytime I speak to a landlord or estate agent, I have to read them this super long email, right? So again, when you're purchasing your domain, maybe it could simply be, festates.co.uk, right? Or it could be something abbreviated, but then on the website, you can obviously advertise your full trading name at Freeman Estates. Because remember, you can have a company name and you can also have a trading name as well. Right? So once you've purchased your domain now, you can use GoDaddy or Wix. I often like Wix because it's very intuitive and you can just simply build it. Or you can also go on Fiverr or Upworks as well and find someone to, inexpensively build your website. But in the early stages, this isn't massively important. You just want to have a simple website landing page about who you are and the service that you provide. Right? So they will often prompt you to sign up for one of them. I would separately go off to do that in Wix just because I don't like doing it off of First Formations. Now, once you've set up your website and your domain, you've got your bank and privacy, all the necessary documentations will start falling out. So now the next stage of compliance is the following. Again from here, but it's also cheaper to do it privately. You want to make sure you're set up with the ICO. With the ICO, it's very important that you set this up because we're going to be dealing with guest data. We're going to be dealing with sensitive information. So in line of GDPR, it's important that we sign up with that. And they're about, from memory or from the time of making this video, about £60 plus or minus VAT, right? Now, in addition to that, you also want to be signed up with the PRS. And note, this isn't the music royalties organization. This is the property redress scheme. There's also, right, if you want, the TPO, which is called the Property Ombudsman. I've not used them. I use the PRS. And these are a property ombudsman. So saying if there's any negligence on your part or if someone wants to make a complaint against you, they're the equivalent of the FCA, right? So they're an organization, a regulated organization that effectively ensure that everyone that's operating within the realm of property has to be aligned with their policies and regulations. Now, the next thing you're gonna need is insurance. Now, this can be broken down into a few different ways. So you can have contents insurance, which I've always advised people to have within their properties. Yes, you may be taking deposits. Yes, you may also be taken care of by Airbnb cover, which is an insurance policy that Airbnb have for all hosts. But I always think it's great to have your separate contents insurance just because if for whatever reason there's a bit of a gray area, you want to make sure you're covered, right? And this can be fairly inexpensive as well per property. Next, you want to make sure that you have professional indemnity and public liability. Now, again, this is very important. The professional indemnity is more so on yourself and your business for any sort of negligence again as well. And public liability is just for if anyone wants to claim for damages, loss, or they slip and fall, or maybe you might have employees or staff. There's also employee liability as well that you can have. But simply, these are sort of stacked together, and you can get them from Simply Business. I can provide you with a link as well in the link below to this video, and they're about £60 a month, right? So this is pretty much all the compliance that you need to make sure that your rent-to-rent business, your Airbnb business, is fully set up. You wanna make sure that you have a fully set up limited liability company. You wanna make sure that you have a name that works. Again, when picking a name, don't pick something Airbnb style. Don't pick something like Freeman Sleeps or Freeman Stays or Sweet Dreams. I always like to just make it about estates, make it about property, make it about management, just because you don't wanna make any sort of red flags potentially when speaking to landlords or estate agents on the phone. Once you've done that, select the privacy package, set up a bag, set up a domain and a website and an email, a simple basic landing page. Then on the compliance aspect, you want to make sure you're set up with the ICO, you want to make sure you're set up with the PRS, and you've got the appropriate insurances in check. So now the fourth thing I want to take you guys through today is what happens when going on a viewing, right? And I'm going to move over to here, divide that, and take you guys through what happens when going on a viewing. Now, when you're going on a viewing, one of the most important things that so many people overlook is the quality of the property. There's nothing worse than when you've paid someone for something, and when it comes to trying to work out a common agreement of how to manage this, they're just dragging their feet. So what I always like to do when doing my viewing is think of it as a maintenance check, right? You want to look at it as a maintenance check and that you're looking for problems, because it's so important that you address all these issues earlier on, right? So you want to check for mold, you want to check for damp, you want to look at the water pressure, you want to see if the energy comes on, if the boiler hasn't been functioning because the property has been vacant for so long, you want to check that. You want to check the sockets, you want to check the lighting, you want to check the fixtures, where's the bin, what's the parking situations. You want to ask as many questions as you can and be as thorough as possible. Now this is going to help you massively when it comes to negotiating separate or different strategies when working for landlord. Again, that is another video I can make in terms of how I negotiate favorable deals. Once you've gone through this, you also want to make sure you bring with you a measuring tape, right? Now, you don't need to be as old school as I am, right? Lots of phones these days will have you sort of like your virtual kind of like measuring tapes to kind of like help you measure it. And the reason why I like to do this is because it gives me an understanding of what type of furniture I can put in the property. If I'm looking at a double room and I think, hold on, I can fit a single bed plus a double bed, which means I can sleep more people rather than this bedroom just taking 2, it can actually take 3. So then that means as soon as I leave that property, I can start having conversations with my manufacturers or start putting things in my basket to start getting things up and ready and running, right? Which is massively important when it comes to setting up your property. So when going on a viewing, you need to be looking for problems. You need to be looking for issues. You need to be looking at the size, the square footage area. You don't want to start looking at all of this once you sign the contract and then issues are coming up. Have the mentality of becoming a maintenance man. Have the mentality of being a guest who's never been to this country before or wherever you're operating, and walking into your property for the first time and thinking, where the hell is everything? Open the windows, making sure that they're flush. What's the water drainage situation? Does it easily go through? Are there any blockages? What's the garden situation? Where's the bins, right? Where do you take that out? Maybe you might be in an apartment complex and it's on the basement or it's on the top floor. Who knows, right? So you want to be as thorough as you can when going on a viewing. So guys, that is pretty much how you would go about setting up a rent-to-rent Airbnb business, the most up-to-date version that I currently take all of my mentees through explicitly. And my mentees also get access to my contracts, my legal packs, all my resources, and my power team. And if you're also looking to start and scale your Airbnb business, right now I've given you the ingredients, right? And if you want the cookbook to be able to put this all together and have the opportunity to work exclusively one-to-one with me to either start, scale, or grow your Airbnb business, click on the link below, book in a call with either myself or a member of my team, and we'll get you sorted. I'll see you in the next video.